Last night, my husband asked for a divorce and announced he wants to give our house to his parents. Just like that, no sugarcoating. While I was washing the dinner dishes in the kitchen sink we remodeled together 3 years ago. I dropped a plate, and the sound of it shattering echoed through the house, a sharp, dry crack of ceramic breaking that'll be etched in my memory forever. He didn't even flinch, just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, like he'd commented on the weather. 22 years of marriage. 22 years building this life here in South Dallas, in this house we bought when it was just a skeleton of bricks and dreams. I still remember the day we signed the mortgage at the bank, hands trembling with nerves and excitement. It was our first home, ours. That word doesn't seem to mean anything anymore. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he asked, and I realized I'd been silent for a long time, staring at the shards scattered across the cold floor. My voice just wouldn't come. It was like someone had ripped the vocal cords from my throat. What could I even say? That I didn't understand? That it must be a joke? That after more than 2 decades together, he can't just show up and decide to hand over everything we built to his parents, Ellen and George? I can still smell the fresh paint from last weekend when we redid the guest room. He complained about the work, said it was too much for his age, but in the end, he was proud of how it turned out. Now I get why he was so insistent on that specific color. His mom always said she loved that shade of seafoam green. He was already prepping the house for them. I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the broken pieces, and he sighed impatiently, as if I was being dramatic, as if it was over the top to be in shock after learning my entire life was about to be redistributed like an inheritance from someone who'd died. Except I'm still alive, at least for now. "Claire, stop it. You'll see this is what's best for everyone," he said in that condescending tone I've grown to hate over the years. The same tone he used when he'd explained that I didn't understand finances or politics or anything that was actually important. I always swallowed it, always nodded along, always pretended he was right. But this time, something different happened. A rage I didn't even know existed inside me started rising in my throat like bitter bile. Best for who, Mark? Not for me. For me, this is the end of everything. He shook his head, the way he does when he thinks I'm being irrational. They need it more than we do. Dad had a stroke last year. Mom can't take care of him in that tiny apartment anymore. We can start over. You're still young. Young. 53 is young now. Young enough to start from scratch. Young enough to lose everything I've built. Young enough to accept that I never really had a claim to anything. I picked up the bigger pieces of the plate and cut my finger. Blood dripped onto the floor, mixing with the shards, and I thought it was the perfect metaphor for this moment. "Where am I supposed to live?" I asked, sucking on the cut. The question came out calmer than I expected, almost curious, like I was asking about the lunch menu. "We'll figure something out. A smaller apartment. You always complained this house was too big anyway." He was right. I did complain. I always said keeping up with 3 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and a backyard was a lot. But complaining about something doesn't mean you want to lose it. Sometimes complaining is just a way of saying you care enough to want it to be different, better. I got up and went to the fridge to grab some ice for my finger. The door was covered with photos of us, trips, birthdays, barbecues with friends. 22 years of life printed on cheap photo paper, stuck on with souvenir magnets. Will he take them down before handing the keys to his parents? Or leave them up as part of the decor? "When did you decide this?" I asked, wrapping my finger in a dish towel. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "It wasn't sudden, Claire. We've been drifting apart for years. You know that." It was true. I knew. But knowing and accepting are 2 different things. In recent years, he'd come home later and later from work, spent entire weekends glued to his phone, slept with his back to me every night. I pretended not to notice, pretended it was just a rough patch that would pass. We stopped making plans together, stopped dreaming about retirement, about the trips we'd take, about the grandkids we might have someday. He stopped asking about my day. I stopped telling him. We became 2 strangers sharing the same roof, the same electric bill, the same empty routine. But the house was always our common ground, the only place where we were still a couple, even if just on paper. It was where we kept our story, where every corner held a memory, where every renovation was a promise of a future. Giving the house to his parents wasn't just splitting an asset. It was erasing our existence as a couple. It was saying that nothing we lived here was worth preserving. "Do your parents know about this?" I asked, knowing the answer would be obvious. Ellen always treated me with a cold politeness, the kind that makes you feel you'll never be good enough for her son. And George, even after the stroke, still had that ability to completely ignore me when I tried to make conversation. "They were surprised at first," Mark said, "but they saw it made sense. Mom said she always thought this house was too big for just the two of us anyway." Of course she did. Ellen always had an opinion about everything in our lives, about how I decorated the living room, about the plants I chose for the garden, about the food I made for family gatherings. Nothing was ever good enough for her standards. Now she'd get the chance to do it all her way. I felt a strange dizziness, like the floor was shifting beneath me. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes, trying to process it all. In a few hours, my life had turned upside down, and I didn't even know how to react. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I asked, eyes still closed. "Not yet. I thought we could settle this amicably." Amicably. As if there's a friendly way to destroy someone's life. As if there's a kind way to take everything someone built and give it to someone else. Amicable for who? For him, who gets to walk away free and relieved? For his parents, who get a house as a gift? Certainly not for me. I opened my eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time that night. Mark was different. Thinner, more tired. But there was a determination in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Like he'd finally found a way out of something that had been bothering him for a long time. "What if I don't agree?" I asked. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "Agree to what? The divorce? Claire, it's over. We both know it. Staying together just for the sake of it makes no sense for either of us. I'm not talking about the divorce. I'm talking about the house." The silence that settled between us was heavy as lead. I could see the gears turning in his mind, calculating, trying to find the right arguments to convince me. It was the same look he got when negotiating something at work. "The house is in my name, Claire. You remember you didn't have enough income to qualify for the mortgage back then." How could I forget? It was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. Going to the bank, filling out all the paperwork, dreaming about our home, only to find out my teacher's salary wasn't enough to secure the loan. Mark had to take it all on himself, and I was left as a kind of dependent in my own home. But I contributed. I paid half of every mortgage payment, half of every renovation, half of every repair. I bought every piece of furniture, every appliance, every plant in the garden. My name might not be on the deed, but my entire life is embedded in this house. I paid half of everything, Mark. You know that. I know, and I won't leave you high and dry. We'll split the other assets. You'll keep the car, the savings, but the house, they need it more. They need it more. As if need were a competition, and I'd lost. As if my need for a home, for roots, for a place that's mine in this world, was less important than the convenience of my in-laws. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The rose bushes I planted in our first year of marriage were blooming. The orange trees Mark planted when we got our first raise were heavy with fruit. The pergola we built together during our 2018 vacation was covered in jasmine. Every inch of that space told our story. And now Ellen would rip out the rose bushes because she doesn't like flowers that take too much work. George would cut down the orange trees because he thinks they attract flies. The pergola would be torn down because it takes up too much space in the yard. Our entire life would be erased to make way for someone else's tastes and needs, as if we'd never existed, as if these 22 years were just a temporary loan of a life that was never truly ours. "I need time to think," I said, still staring at the garden. "There's not much to think about, Claire. The decision's already made. Made by who? By him? By his parents? By everyone but me? Was I the only one who didn't get a say in this whole thing?" I turned to face him. "The decision was made by you. I wasn't part of it. I didn't even know I was being judged and sentenced." "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic? Sure. Because losing your home, your marriage, and your dignity all at once is just a minor inconvenience anyone would take in stride. Because 53 years of life can be discarded without any drama, like recyclable trash. I left the kitchen without another word. I climbed the stairs slowly, hearing each step creak under my feet. Steps I'd varnished myself last winter when we decided the wood needed care. Now I wondered why I'd bothered. I went into the bedroom and sat on the bed. Our bed. The bed where we made love for the first time as husband and wife, where we talked about having kids, where we cried together when we found out it wasn't possible, where we shared dreams and fears for over 2 decades. Now it was just a bed that would be replaced with a twin when Ellen redecorated. Because older couples sleep separately, she always said. It's more hygienic. Mark came up a few minutes later. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he could come in or if I'd kick him out. Like we'd suddenly become strangers who needed permission to share the same space. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're stronger than you think." Strong. Another word that's lost its meaning. What strength when your entire life is dismantled without you having a say? What strength when the person who promised to love and honor you until death do us part decides you're disposable? I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy for an argument. I just wanted him to leave the room and let me be alone with the weight of what I'd just learned. I needed silence to figure out how it had all come to this without me noticing. He lingered in the doorway for a few more seconds, waiting for some reaction. When he saw I wasn't going to say anything, he muttered a quiet, "Good night," and left, closing the door carefully. Good night. As if it were possible to have a good night after finding out your life was a lie. As if it were possible to sleep, knowing I'd wake up tomorrow without a home, without a marriage, without a future. I stayed awake until sunrise, staring at the ceiling, trying to pinpoint when it all started falling apart. At what point did I stop being an important person in my own life and become just an obstacle in the way of other people's plans? The worst part was knowing this didn't start last night in the kitchen. It started slowly, day by day, decision by decision that was made without me. I just hadn't realized I was being erased from my own existence until it was too late to react. Or maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe there was still something I could do. Some way to fight for what was rightfully mine, even if my name wasn't on the paper. But first, I needed to understand how I'd gotten here. How I'd let my life be handed over to others as if I were a child incapable of deciding for herself. The answer was somewhere in those 22 years. In the small concessions I made, the times I swallowed my pride, the fights I avoided to keep the peace. It was in the woman I'd become without realizing. Invisible, disposable, replaceable. But maybe it wasn't too late to find the woman I was before I lost myself along the way. I woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. Mark had left early, as he always did when he wanted to avoid tough conversations. The clock read 6:30 a.m., and I hadn't slept a wink. My body ached like I'd been beaten, every muscle tense from the stress of the night before. I went downstairs to the kitchen and found a note stuck to the fridge. Went to work. We'll talk better tonight. Love. Love. As if this were a normal day. As if he hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. I swept up the pieces of the plate still scattered on the floor. Each shard I collected felt like a fragment of my own existence breaking apart. When I was done, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the empty space where my life used to make sense. The phone rang, and for a second, I thought it might be Mark. Maybe calling to apologize, to say it was a misunderstanding, that he was going through a midlife crisis and said something stupid. But it was my sister, Emily, calling from Austin like she does every Thursday. "Hey sis, how's everything going up there?" Her voice was cheerful, carefree. I couldn't answer. My throat closed up, and the words just wouldn't come. "Claire, you there?" "I'm here," I managed to whisper. "Geez, what's with that voice? Are you sick?" Sick. Maybe that was a good word for what I was feeling. A deep nausea, like my body was rejecting the new reality that had been forced on me. "Emily, Mark wants a divorce." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on forever. I could hear her breathing, processing, trying to find the right words. "Oh my God, Claire, what happened?" "He wants to give our house to his parents." "What do you mean, give the house? I don't get it." I told her everything, every detail of the night before, every word Mark had said, every humiliation I'd swallowed in silence. Emily listened without interrupting, but I could feel her anger growing through the phone. "That bastard can't do this to you," she exploded when I finished. "You built that life together. You have rights. He said the house is in his name. So what? You're married. You share assets. He can't just decide what to do with a home you built together." Her anger gave me a strange kind of strength. It felt good to know at least one person in the world thought this was as outrageous as I did. That I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, that I had every reason to be devastated. "You need to get a lawyer like yesterday," Emily went on. "You can't let this slide. If you do, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." After we hung up, I thought about her words. Getting a lawyer meant declaring war, turning a separation into a legal battle, exposing our private life for strangers to judge who was right. But maybe that's exactly what I needed to do. I called work and made up an excuse to take the day off. I couldn't teach in this state, pretending everything was fine in front of my students. I needed time to think, to make decisions, to figure out my options. I sat at the computer and started researching divorce rights. I read articles, forums, stories from other women who'd been through something similar. I learned Emily was right. I had rights. The house might be in Mark's name, but I was entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. The problem was proving my contribution. I'd need to gather receipts, bank statements, proof of every cent I'd put into that house over more than 2 decades. I went to the home office we shared upstairs. One desk for each of us, organizers stuffed with papers, files from years of shared financial life. I started digging through drawers, looking for any document that could prove my role in buying and maintaining the house. That's when I found it. In a folder of old documents, there was an envelope I'd never seen before. Inside, a series of printed emails between Mark and his mother, Ellen, from 6 months ago. My hand shook as I started reading. "Mom, Claire doesn't suspect anything yet. I'm waiting for the right moment to talk to her about the divorce. Son, are you sure she won't make trouble about the house? Your dad's getting worse every day, and we need a bigger place. Don't worry, the house is in my name, and she's always been pretty passive. She'll go along with it. And if she gets a lawyer? She won't. Claire doesn't have the guts for that kind of fight. She's always avoided conflict." I felt sick, literally sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up everything in my stomach, which wasn't much since I hadn't even managed breakfast. They'd been planning this for months. Months. While I was taking care of the house, cooking for him, washing his clothes, sleeping next to him every night, they were scheming behind my back. Deciding my future like I was a piece of furniture that could be tossed out when it wasn't useful anymore. What hurt most was how they talked about me. Always been pretty passive. Doesn't have the guts for a fight. She'll go along with it. Like they knew me better than I knew myself. Like they'd studied my weaknesses to use against me. And the worst part? They were right. All these years, I really was passive. I really avoided conflict. I really went along with everything. I swallowed my pride, pretended everything was fine, prioritized family harmony over my own dignity. Now they were counting on that to get what they wanted without a fight, betting I'd be predictable one more time. I went back to the office with the emails in hand. I read them again, every word, every comma. There were more messages detailing how the transition would work, how they'd help Ellen and George move in, how they'd remodel the guest room to make it more accessible for an elderly man with stroke-related issues. My guest room, the one I decorated, kept clean and tidy, where we hosted family for the holidays, where my niece slept when she visited, where I dreamed a grandchild of ours might stay someday. Now it was going to be Ellen's room. I picked up the phone and called a law firm I'd found online. I booked a consultation for that same day. I couldn't wait any longer. Every hour that passed was another hour they had to execute their plan. The lawyer's name was Dr. Patricia, a woman in her 40s with a direct gaze and a demeanor that radiated competence. I told her the whole story, showed her the emails I'd found, explained my financial situation. "Mrs. Claire, you have a very strong case," she said after reviewing the documents. "Regardless of the house being in your husband's name, you're under a community property regime. Everything acquired during the marriage belongs to both of you. And these emails are excellent proof of bad faith on his part. But what if he's already transferred the house? He can't have done that yet. Any transfer of real estate during a divorce process can be considered fraudulent. We'll file for an injunction to block any movement on the house. I left her office with a strange feeling. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely powerless in this situation. That maybe there was a way to fight. But I was also scared. Scared of the war that was about to start. Scared of the consequences. Scared of finding out even worse things about the man I'd shared more than half my life with. When I got home, Mark was already there, sitting in the living room, watching TV like it was any other day, like he hadn't just torn our family apart the night before. "Where were you?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. "Taking care of some things." "What things?" I took a deep breath. It was time to show that the passive, predictable Claire had died that morning in his office. "I went to see a lawyer." Now he looked at me. The shock on his face almost made up for all the humiliation I'd felt. He really hadn't expected me to fight back. "Claire, that wasn't necessary. We can work this out by talking." "Can we?" "Because so far, you've only talked to me after you'd already decided everything on your own." I pulled the emails out of my bag and tossed them on the coffee table. "Or rather, after you and your mom decided everything on your own." The color drained from his face when he saw the papers. He got up from the couch and grabbed the emails, scanning them quickly like he couldn't believe I'd found them. "Where did you get this?" "In your files, in the office we shared." "Funny how you kept evidence of your scheme in the same place I work every day." He sank back into the couch, looking at the papers like they were a death sentence. "It wasn't like that," he said finally. "Wasn't like what? You weren't planning this for months? You weren't discussing it with your mom before you had the guts to tell me? You weren't betting I'd just go along with it because I'm so passive? I was going to talk to you at the right time. The right time would have been before you started planning my future. The right time would have been including me in decisions that affect my life. The right time would have been treating me like your wife, not an obstacle to get rid of." Mark got up and started pacing the room. I recognized that behavior. It's what he did when he was nervous, when things weren't going as planned. "You don't understand my parents' situation. Dad can barely walk since the stroke. Mom's too old to take care of him in that tiny apartment. And why does the solution have to be giving them our house? Why not help them financially? Why not find them a bigger apartment? Why is the only option kicking me out of my home? Because..." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "Because I don't want this life anymore, Claire. I don't want this marriage. And I thought it'd be easier for everyone if the house went to someone who really needs it. Easier for everyone but me. Once again, I was the least important person in the equation of my own life. Then you're going to have to fight for it," I said. "Because I'm done making things easy for you all. I'm tired of being the only one who loses in every decision this family makes. You're being irrational. This house means more to my parents than it does to you. You can start over anywhere." "Can I? At 53 with a teacher's salary, no savings because I poured everything into this house for 22 years? I can start over, but your parents can't move to a more suitable place." He didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, he did. But he knew it would only confirm what I was already thinking, that I'd always been less important than his family. "You'll regret this," he said, finally showing the side of him I'd been waiting to see. The subtle threat, the attempt to intimidate me. I'm already regretting things. I'm regretting spending 22 years pretending I was happy with a man who never respected me. I'm regretting letting myself be treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. I left the room and went upstairs to the bedroom. I needed time to process everything I'd learned that day. I needed to figure out how far I was willing to go in this fight. Mark followed me up an hour later. He came into the bedroom with a different expression, softer, like he'd rehearsed a new speech. "Claire, let's talk calmly. Maybe we can come to an agreement that works for everyone." "What kind of agreement?" "You keep the house, but you take on the remaining mortgage debt, and you cover the costs of an apartment for my parents." I stared at him like he was an alien. The audacity was astounding. I'd keep the house, but I'd also pay for his parents' new place. In other words, I'd bear double the costs to hold on to what was already mine. Are you serious? It's a fair solution. Everyone gets what they want. Everyone but me, who'd be paying for 2 homes on a single income. You could rent out one of the rooms, or sell the house and buy something smaller. Each suggestion was more absurd than the last. It was like we were living in parallel universes where fairness meant something completely different. Mark, the fair agreement is you paying support to your parents and splitting our assets 50-50, like the law says. The law isn't always the best way to solve family problems, but it's the only way when the family can't talk honestly and respectfully. He went silent, clearly frustrated by my resistance. For all these years, he'd suggest something, and I'd agree. It was easier to go along than to fight, easier to do what he wanted than to stand up for my opinion. But something fundamental had changed in me. Maybe it was finding those emails. Maybe it was hearing the lawyer say I had rights. Maybe it was just reaching the limit of humiliation a person can take. Tomorrow, you'll get a notice from my lawyer, I said. From now on, all communication about the divorce will go through our legal representatives. You're making a mistake, Claire. You're turning something that could have been simple into a war. I didn't turn anything into a war. You and your family declared war on me when you planned my future behind my back. I'm just defending myself. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door. I heard him go downstairs, grab his car keys, and leave the house. Probably went straight to his parents to tell them the passive Claire had decided to fight back. I was alone in the bedroom, lying on our bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand who this new woman was who'd taken over my body. This woman who spoke up, who hired a lawyer, who refused emotional blackmail. It was a strange, scary feeling, but it was also liberating. For the first time in decades, I'd done something to defend my own interests. I'd put my dignity above family harmony. I'd chosen to fight instead of accept. I didn't know if I'd win the battle. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know what price I'd pay for deciding not to be invisible anymore. But I knew I couldn't go back. The Claire who went along with everything was gone that morning, and I didn't miss her one bit. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. Mark came home in the middle of the night, slept on the living room couch, and left early in the morning without speaking to me. It was like we were 2 ghosts sharing the same space, avoiding any contact that might spark another confrontation. On Friday, he got the notice from my lawyer. I heard the intercom buzz, saw him sign for it, watched his expression change as he read the document. It was real now. Official. No turning back. Claire, we need to talk, he said. His voice was different, heavier, like he'd finally realized I wasn't bluffing. He came down to the living room where I was grading papers. He sat in the armchair across from the couch, still holding the notice. My lawyer says you could make things really messy if you want. Your lawyer? You already had a lawyer before you even talked to me about the divorce? The question caught him off guard. He opened and closed his mouth a few times before answering. I sought legal advice, yeah, just to understand my rights. Your rights. And mine? Did anyone bother to explain my rights in the 6 months you spent planning my life? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was a gesture I knew well, one he used when he was buying time to come up with an answer. The lawyer said it'd be smarter for us to reach an agreement, that a court battle is exhausting for everyone. Exhausting for who, Mark? For you, who'll have to explain why you schemed with your mom to kick me out? Or for your parents, who'll have to find another solution to their problems? He got up and started pacing the room again. That familiar behavior that used to make me anxious because it meant he was nervous. Now it gave me a strange satisfaction to see I'd finally knocked him out of his comfort zone. My parents don't know about this yet. They don't know you got a lawyer. And why don't they? Did they think I'd just take it quietly and they wouldn't even have to worry about my reaction? It's not like that. It's exactly like that, Mark. You underestimated me. You bet I'd be predictable again, that I'd swallow this humiliation without fighting back. The phone rang, cutting off our conversation. It was Ellen. Mark answered with a look of panic, like he knew something bad was coming. Hi, Mom. What? How did you? No, I haven't said anything yet. He shot me an accusatory look. Okay, I'll come over. He hung up and glared at me. Someone told my mom about the lawsuit. She's freaking out. I didn't tell her anything. Then who did? I shrugged. It wasn't my job to shield Ellen from the consequences of the plans she helped make. If someone had told her something, it wasn't me. Maybe it was the county clerk when they blocked the house transfer. Or maybe it was her own lawyer when they checked on how to handle the move. His face got even worse. It was obvious they'd already consulted a lawyer about transferring the house. Probably even had papers ready, just waiting for my passive acceptance to go through with it. I'm going over to talk to them. You stay here. I'll go wherever I want, Mark. You don't call the shots anymore. He stopped at the door and turned to look at me. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A coldness that made me realize I might never have truly known the man I married. You're going to regret this, Claire. My parents are elderly, my dad's sick. If anything happens to them because of this tantrum of yours, it's not a tantrum, it's self-defense. He slammed the door so hard, the picture frames on the wall shook. I was left alone in the house, in the heavy silence that followed the storm. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. It was Emily. Claire, Ellen called me. My heart raced. What do you mean? Called you? She got my number somehow and called me crying, saying you're being cruel to her and George, that they just need a place to live, and you're stopping them out of spite. Ellen's audacity left me speechless. Calling my sister, who she barely knew, to try to guilt-trip me through family. What did you tell her? I told her she was calling the wrong person, that if she had a problem with you, she should deal with you directly, and I hung up on her. I laughed for the first time in days. It was exactly the response I'd expect from Emily. But Claire, this means they're desperate. When they start calling family, it's because they know they're losing. She was right. Ellen's call wasn't a sign of strength. It was a sign of desperation. They were realizing their perfect plan had a flaw. Me. Sis, you need to brace yourself. They're going to try everything now. Emotional blackmail, smear campaigns, maybe even threats. People used to getting their way don't take kindly to being challenged. By Saturday morning, I found out what Emily meant. I was having coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the intercom, I heard Ellen's tearful voice asking to come in. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She stormed in like a hurricane of self-pity, eyes red from crying, hands shaking dramatically. Claire, honey, what's all this madness? Why are you doing this to us? Honey, in 22 years of marriage, she'd never called me that. It was always Mark's wife, or when she was feeling particularly warm. Claire, I'm not doing anything to you, Ellen. I'm defending my rights. But what rights, honey? The house is Mark's. He can do what he wants with it. No, he can't. We're married under community property. Half of everything is mine. She sank onto the couch like she was about to faint. The drama was in full swing. You don't have a heart, Claire. George can barely walk. I'm too old to take care of him in that tiny apartment. We just need a decent place to spend our final years. And why does that place have to be my house? Your house. She looked at me like I'd said something blasphemous. This house belongs to the family. Mark bought it. Mark paid for it. Mark decides. There it was, the raw truth. To her, I'd never been real family. Just a temporary add-on who could be discarded when no longer convenient. I paid half of every mortgage payment, Ellen. Half of every renovation, every repair, every improvement. My name might not be on the deed, but my entire life is in these walls. Money can be replaced, honey. Family can't. And we're family. And me? Am I not family? The silence that followed said it all. Ellen realized she'd revealed more than she meant to. She tried to backtrack, but it was too late. Of course you're family, Claire. But not family enough to have a claim to what's mine. She switched tactics, her tone turning sharper. You're being selfish. Two young people like you can start over anywhere. We can't. We need this more. Young. 53 is young now when it suits her. Ellen, you have an apartment. You have your pensions. You have the means to improve your situation without taking what's mine. Taking? We're not taking anything from anyone. My son decided to help us, and you're stopping him out of pure spite. The mask of the poor little old lady fell off completely. Now I was seeing the real Ellen, the one who'd always seen me as an intruder in her son's life. Your son decided without consulting me. He decided to give away something that's mine too. That's a crime, Ellen. It's called asset dissipation. She shot up from the couch like she'd been shocked. Are you threatening my son? I'm explaining the law to you. The law? She laughed with contempt. The law is for people without family, honey. Families sort things out by talking. Then let's talk. You pay support to Mark to help with your expenses. He pays me alimony, and everyone keeps what's theirs. Never. I'm not paying support to anyone. It's a son's job to take care of his parents, and it's a husband's job to respect his wife's rights. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Two women from different generations with completely opposite views on family, duty, and justice. You've changed, Claire, she said finally. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you've changed, and not for the better. You're right, I have changed. I'm tired of being invisible in my own life. Ellen left my house with the same dramatic fury she'd arrived with. But before she went, she turned at the door and said something that chilled me to the bone. You'll regret this, Claire. People like you, who don't respect family, always end up badly. It wasn't just emotional blackmail anymore. It was a threat. By Sunday, the war escalated to a new level. Mark came home with his older brother, Robert, who lived in Fort Worth and whom I hadn't seen in over a year. Robert was a lawyer, specializing in business law, with that typical arrogance of someone who thinks they can solve any problem with intimidation. Claire, Mark told me about all this mess. I don't think you're fully grasping the situation. What situation, Robert? The family's financial situation, the costs of a lawsuit, the consequences of a public fight. He sat in the armchair like he owned the place and started explaining with that professorial tone he used to show off his intellectual superiority. Look, you might technically have a claim to half the house, but in practice, you'll spend a fortune on lawyers. It'll take years to resolve, and you might end up with a lot less than you'd get if you took a fair deal now. What kind of deal? Mark and Robert exchanged a look. It was clear they'd rehearsed this conversation. The house goes to our parents, as planned. In exchange, you get a $50,000 settlement and keep the car. $50,000 for a house worth at least $400,000. For 22 years of my life invested in this place. For half of everything we built together. You're out of your minds if you think I'll accept that. $50,000 is a reasonable amount, Claire, Robert went on. It's enough for you to rent a nice apartment, get settled, start over. And you get a $400,000 house for $50,000. The house is worth $400,000 on paper, Mark cut in. But there's still the mortgage to pay off, maintenance costs, property taxes. Costs I've been paying half of for all these years. Robert sighed, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. Claire, you need to be realistic. You don't have the resources for a long legal battle. Your teacher's salary barely covers your living expenses. How are you going to afford a lawyer? There it was, their real strategy. Not just taking the house from me, breaking me financially in the process, forcing me to give up because I couldn't afford to fight. My lawyer works on contingency. If I win, she gets paid. If I lose, I owe nothing. Robert's expression changed. He clearly hadn't expected me to have thought of that. Contingency lawyer? He laughed dismissively. Those are the worst, Claire. They promise the world and ditch you at the first sign of trouble. Or they're the most motivated because they only get paid if their client wins. Mark stood up, clearly frustrated with how the conversation was going. Claire, you're not being reasonable. We're offering you a dignified way out for everyone. Dignified for who? For you, who get to keep everything? For me, who's left with nothing? You're not left with nothing, Robert said. You get $50,000 in a car. That's more than a lot of divorced people walk away with. It's less than what I'm entitled to by law. They spent another hour trying to convince me to take the deal. They used every argument in the book. Their parents' age, the cost of the lawsuit, the emotional toll, the chance I'd lose. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about the emails I'd found, the months-long scheme to kick me out, the coldness with which they'd planned to discard 22 years of my life. No, I said, when they finally stopped talking. I'm not taking any deal. I'd rather take my chances in court. Robert packed up the papers he'd brought with barely concealed anger. You'll regret this, Claire. When you're paying a lawyer with money you don't have, you'll remember the generous offer you turned down. And you'll regret it when you have to explain to a judge why you conspired to defraud me of my rights. After they left, I was alone in the house that now felt more mine than ever. Every piece of furniture, every object, every mark on the walls told the story of my life. And I wasn't going to give it all up for $50,000 in a used car. On Monday morning, I called Dr. Patricia and told her about the settlement attempt. $50,000? She laughed. Mrs. Clare, that just confirms they know the house is worth way more and that you're entitled to half. Nobody offers a settlement when they're sure they'll win. So we move forward with the lawsuit? We do. And with these intimidation attempts you've described, we have even more leverage. They're desperate. I hung up the phone with a strange sense of power. For the first time in my life, I'd chosen to fight instead of accept. I'd chosen to defend my rights instead of keeping the peace. I didn't know if I'd win. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know what price I'd pay. But I knew I'd never again let myself be treated as disposable. Never again let others decide my future without consulting me. The war was just beginning, but for the first time, I was an active player in the game of my own life. And this time, I was playing to win.